Cool. Okay. Right. I'm going to kick off then. I don't know if there's not that many people, but I'll focus on you four. So, yeah, I am. My name's Tom, and I'm from a company called Honest Burgers. I was going to ask if anyone's eaten at our restaurants, but there's very few people here, so we might be. I know that she has, and these two have, so we do have some people. But yeah, I'm going to talk today about my business, which we set up, we think, from quite a humble position, from a very small marquee in a field normally in the rain, and we were trying to sell burgers to anyone that would have us, and we've managed to grow that business to a 44-strong national burger chain. Could even say international, because we've got a branch in Cardiff, maybe, if that's a stretch. But today I'm going to talk you through how we grew, and more importantly, how we grew the business in a way that I still think makes us honest. And we still try and live up to our name, and I think it's a really great decision to have a powerful word in your title and your business name, because it's a really good foundation to keep hold of. And a word like honest, it keeps us in check. So this is myself and Phil in look at us, all fresh-faced and youthful, straight out of university, and this is how we started. So not in a muddy field in the rain, but this is a job we did in Brighton, which is actually where the business was founded. And yeah, we were young, naive, and arrogance of youth and all that. And we never in a million years thought we'd open a restaurant, is the irony here. We always thought we would go into the festival burger and, go after Glastonbury. That was our, sort of big thing on the horizon, until we realized you need about 25 grand to open a stall in Glastonbury, and we didn't have 25 quid at that stage. So we kind of slowly bumbled through. And I love this photo because I like to show people how crap we were when we first started. This was my first photo shoot, and I'm in charge of all the food. Now they're better than some burgers, but they weren't as good as where we are today. But this was our first kind of menu. But our chips are still homemade, still rosemary salted. So there's a few good wins in there. And then you fast forward to where we're at today. This is our slightly more polished burger. This is the Honest Burger. We make the majority of those ingredients in our own prep kitchen, and we source those ingredients carefully, which is what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about later on. And then this is one of our very new burgers that's come onto our menu, which is a smash burger, which we've launched back in October. It's been a huge success, and it's there for speed and for convenience, and it's also really good value. So a single smash burger and chips is £8.50, which you can pay that for a McDonald's in a service station these days. So we really do think we're tackling the current climate really well. And this is the business today. So we've gone from that tiny little marquee to this national concept. And I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about how we've done that. So to start off with, I mentioned the humbleness. This is our first restaurant, believe it or not. It does not look like somewhere you want to eat food in this current state. This is from Brixton Village. Now, anyone here been to Brixton Village? Yes, 2. Awesome. So 3. Brixton Village is amazing, but I'm a huge fan, obviously, because it was completely integral to us and our business. But if you are ever in London and you fancy trying some great food, Brixton Village is amazing. It's a 1920s arcade. And all the restaurants are about that size, which means everyone has this kind of laser focus on what they do. And it's brilliant. But obviously, our site was a little bit of a rough diamond when we took it. And we genuinely, physically put blood, sweat and tears into that site. And we turned it into this. With the paltry sum of £7.5 grand in our bank account, we managed to go from that to that. So you can imagine we pulled a lot of favours in. My wife is a graphic designer, so she did all of our graphic design work, which has now stood the test of time and has won tons of awards and is something I'm super proud of. My father-in-law is a carpenter, So he helped us with the furniture, and we were electricians and plumbers and whatever we needed to be to try and get the doors open, which I do not recommend because we spent about 10 times what it would have spent us to get a professional in to put the rights that we got stuck in with. But this was our first baby, right? And we opened the doors to queues and queues of hungry Londoners. And we weren't prepared, you might imagine, but we were regularly telling people it's going to be 3 hours for a table, kind of almost embarrassed, and people are like, okay, cool. And they just stick themselves on the list and go off for a drink and come back 3 hours later for this burger in this tiny little unit in Brixton. So we were shocked, to say the least. But we knew we were onto something because it didn't stop. We were just getting busier and busier and busier. And people loved what we were doing and our approach to food. And our approach to food and to service is what matters in restaurants, right? I'm not going to talk about, there's hundreds of different trades here, and I'm sure lots of people here are from very diverse trades. I'm in restaurants. I know what really matters in restaurants, and generally it's what matters in everyone's trade. It's distilling it right down to the things that really mean something. For us, it's food and it's people. Good restaurant will survive on good food and good people, and that's the customers as well. Customers need to be nice as well, and customers aren't always nice, but when you get good customers with good people that work for you, with good food, you get this amazing creation, and it's rare these days, but it can work, and it can work at scale. So food is the thing that I'm passionate about. That was my first kind of proper title, was Director of Food, and these are the 3 pillars of our food kind of mantra, which is we want to stand out. So a lot of businesses now, and when we first set this business up back in 2011, the kind of American dude food kind of thing was going big, and it still is going big. We didn't want to do that. That wasn't in my roots. You know, the food I ate when I was a kid was stuff that my mum would cook, and it was homemade, kind of chunky, farmer's market style burgers with good British cheeses on. So that's the angle we took. So we're great British burgers. Then we've got rosemary salted chips, which they're just as kind of famous as our burger. And what struck me when we started this thing out is a lot of people spend time on the burger and then they just buy a frozen chip in, which I couldn't get my head around. You know, you buy the same chip from, there's like 4 manufacturers in the whole of Europe that supply these chips to tens of thousands of businesses. And it just didn't feel right to kind of cop out. So we do homemade chips. We go the extra mile. We dust them with rosemary salt as well. And we make stuff ourselves. So this is our prep kitchen, that bottom right-hand corner. We make as much food ourselves because, again, we think if you make it yourself, it's individual, it's unique. You're going to stand out in a super crowded workplace. We do monthly specials. Sorry if none of you have had lunch. I can't attest to the burger in the cafeteria over there, but I don't think it'll be like one of these. We do monthly specials, and these are, you know, we try and keep the core menu super focused, and then we do monthly specials that change every month, and then we do local burgers in all of our restaurants as well, which our teams get behind, and they create and they come up and they find local suppliers, and it kind of keeps our menu kind of a bit interesting. And yeah, the chips, as I've already said, burger and chips. You always have chips with your burger. So why do people charge you extra for them? And why are they always frozen and boring? So we wanted to do it included in the price. You get your burger and your chips on the same plate, included in the price, and they're homemade. And that was a really, really big thing for us. And it went down really well. We had the likes of Jay Rayner come in, and I would take this as quite a good endorsement. I'm not promoting Class A drug use here, but Jay Rayner absolutely loved them, and he kind of set the ball rolling, and people got really, really excited by a burger brand doing something a bit more interesting with their offering. And this is just a photo of some of the interesting potatoes I've come across on my travels. That probably is quite a weird slide, but I thought I'd show people. And then the second thing, which is kind of linked to hopefully the reason why you guys are here, which is around pride and people. Now, we're a growing business. You know, the world is a growing population. We all need to be looking at how on earth we're going to be more sustainable as we grow. And the truth is, if the level you're trying to sustain is already broken, we're not up for a good future. So we all need to really, really have a look at ourselves as business owners, as employees, as people that eat out in restaurants, things like that. We need to be asking some of these questions, and we need to be looking really deep into our sustainability, which is exactly what I did. And sadly, what I found is pretty much the exact opposite of these two words in the sustainability market. It's quite shocking, really, and I kind of went on this deep dive about 5 years ago. I'd be lying if I said Honest even thought about sustainability when we started the business. We really didn't. We didn't think about our imprint. We didn't know if we would be a big business. And fortunately for us, that word above our door has constantly kept me in check and constantly made me want to look deeper into ourselves and work out how does a business called Honest that sells a lot of meat do better for the planet. Now, that was the challenge I gave myself, and it's quite a difficult one. But I went on a deep dive, and I realized that most businesses I were coming across that were making big, bold claims that you read them, and you're like, oh, that's amazing. You peel it back a little bit, and there's very little substance to it. And some of the things coming out now, further down the line, there's very little substance to it. Some of these claims are wildly exaggerated. They're relying on third, fourth, fifth party businesses halfway around the world. They're not working. So we wanted to approach sustainability in a way that was true to our business name. So it had to be honest and it had to be authentic. And that's not just for you guys. You know, some of you guys hopefully will be customers of ours. It's also for the people that work for us. Because people, you know, what I said before, people need pride. If they know that you are bullshitting them, they will not stay. They will not enjoy it. They won't see honesty or authenticity in your strategy. So it's really important that we actually faced into these problems. We didn't just sweep it under the carpet. We're a beef business. We're going to be a beef business probably for the rest of my lifetime, but who knows? So it was important that we really don't shy away from it. But one of the things that I did come across, which I guarantee every one of you will have, you may not know it, but you will have seen an epic proportion of greenwashing over your travels, maybe even in this room, who knows. But it's rife, and it's basically people that are making statements that they don't really have to back up with anything. It's style over substance. And in my industry, it's happening an awful lot. You know, food is incredibly complicated. It's very difficult to really nail down where your food's coming from. So restaurants are using what I think is pretty weak strategies when it comes to sustainability, and they're ending up in a place like this. So this is a very, 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 very big clothes brand, and I took this photo in Carnaby Street, and this is a perfect example of greenwashing for me, where it starts off, it's a nice sentence, it feels good, and then it's that little caveat at the end, those 4 last words that kind of mean, well, you know, if it doesn't exist, then we'll just keep going. You know, and for me, I look at that, and I read it, and I stopped me in my tracks, and I was like, God, this is embarrassing. Like, this is one of the biggest clothing manufacturers in the world, and they're putting that on their shop front. I'm wondering, you know, what do you guys think when you read that? What do people who work for them, what would they think when they read that? I know this is what I thought when I read it, all right? Now, I was just like, come on, this is ridiculous. Now, this cow pat actually is one I took from one of our regenerative farms, so this is actually better than that previous statement. But you get the drift of what I was trying to say there. But when you look at sustainability, there's 3 scopes that you have to focus on, okay? So scope 1, for my industry, it's around kind of things like transport and fuel and your head office and your buildings, things like that. Scope 2, and you do these in order, right? Scope 2 is about utilities and waste disposal. And then scope 3, the big one, everything else, okay? Scope 3 is massive, and what I didn't understand when I was looking at this is why would you focus on scope 1, scope 2, and then scope 3? Like, there's a certain level of urgency to this. I think we're kind of in agreement on. Why do it that way round? Why not start with the hardest thing? Because everything else, and for us, you know, for a restaurant brand, it's your supply chain. That's going to be the biggest thing to shift and to change. So that's what we decided to do. We were like, we don't, you know, every business has a finite level of resource, whether it's time or cash. They have a finite amount when they're tackling their imprint on the planet. So why spend that on the scope 1 and scope 2? Why not just go straight in at the deep end with the harder thing? So this is what we tried to do. And what we really, really made sure of is we didn't want to focus on these. Is everyone aware what a carbon offset is? Yeah? Okay. Are you aware they don't work? Yeah? Good, all right. So carbon offsetting in principle is what a lot of people are using their money. Businesses, banks have been offsetting their carbon for decades now. It's not really working. But what you're doing is you're taking some money, you're investing in a scheme that apparently will offset the carbon you produce as a business. Now, I say apparently because a lot of these schemes are completely unregulated. They're from all around the world, and they're very difficult to accredit them. But it's an easy thing, it's an easy win for businesses with spare cash to just go, shit, we've got all this carbon, we've got all this money, let's just pay for it to go away, and then we can carry on as our business, all right? So, Amazon, Google, they're all carbon neutral. Even the biggest carbon offsetting scheme in the world is this company called Vera. This came out a couple of weeks ago. They've been dragged through the mud big time now because there's estimates, and The Guardian did a big investigative piece, estimates that they overestimated their level of carbon sequestration capacity by 90%. And they took billions of pounds from some of the biggest companies in the world. Google's one of their biggest customers. So you've got this very, very fragile house of cards that everyone is, being quite virtuous about, going after it, putting billions into it. They think carbon offsetting by 2050 is going to be worth $200 billion. So it's a massive industry, but it's not working. So for Honest, we were very sure, very, very certain we do not want to get on board with carbon offsetting. Not yet. Everyone will need to use carbon offsetting eventually. And things like planting trees, they're a great thing to do. Personally, I don't think private sector should be doing it. I think we should leave that to the government. They should be dealing with that kind of stuff, but that's a whole other rant. I think that we should all be focusing on the biggest elephant in the room. Now, for us, that is our supply chain. So I dug deep into our supply chain, and the first question I had is, what is the enemy for us? What's the worst thing that happens in a beef supply chain? And you've probably seen things like this. You've probably heard this phrase, factory farming or intensified farming. And, on paper, it's a huge success. It's keeping costs down. It's massively efficient. It's employing lots of people. But it's doing absolutely no good bar those things, okay? So it's rinsing the landscapes it's in. It's putting animal welfare at the absolute bottom of the pile. But it's cheap food. And I know now more than ever, it's very difficult to talk about more expensive food, right? So again, I think factory farming has been left to kind of run wild a little bit. And I think it's partly the government's fault because it's something that is very, very difficult. And I think it's quite emotive, when even you know nothing about farming, you see something like that, I don't think that makes you feel good. I don't think you look at that and think, yeah, I'd love to buy from that supplier. And truth be told, you probably will have done. If you buy meat from the supermarket, in this country, you'll have bought something from this kind of setup, which is very, very unnatural, but it's very, very cheap. It's very, very efficient. So this is something that obviously Honest has never supported, but it is on the rise. There are over 700 factory farms in the UK, and that's not just beef farms. That's all sorts of different farms. But they literally are just putting speed and efficiency and cost above every single thing. And it's a degenerative system. Okay, it's taking more out than it's putting back in, and it's completely and utterly unsustainable. So our current position, I'm going back about 5 years now, which is just before, a few years before the pandemic, but when I first started looking at Honest and our impact, and I thought we were doing the best we could. So our current position was this, which granted looks a bit better than that, but this was what we were buying. We were buying grass-fed, native breed cattle, which I thought that was the gold standard. But this is why I urge you, if any of you, have got businesses and you're really going after your sustainability, you need to dig deeper and you need to ask the difficult questions and you need to go to site and you need to check things out, which I know if you're buying from all around the world can be difficult, but you may not get the correct answers unless you really do commit. Because I went to our suppliers and realised actually grass-fed doesn't mean very much. That's why supermarkets very rarely use the term, because they don't back it up with anything. But for our supplier, grass-fed meant 51% of that animal's life could be grass. The other 49% could be anything. So, and that, you put numbers as specific as that in, farmers can't, they're not going to manage to work that out. Nature and animals don't work like that. It's not an exact template. So for me, I learned that and I was like, God, this is another kind of blow. This feels completely inauthentic and very, very difficult for me to get behind. So I started to think, what can we do that's better? And this is where we began. This is honest farming, all right? Now, I could talk to you until your ears bleed about this subject because I love it and it's super passionate and it's based around regenerative agriculture, which again is to go deep into that is another session. I'll gladly talk to you guys afterwards, but I've got a quick video I'm going to show you because it's going to explain a bit about honest farming in a finite way, and I'm hoping it's all going to work very nicely. There we go. All right, so I'll keep quiet. We all need to eat less meat. Not all meat is the same. So eating less and knowing more about the I feel that my family is quite we're against farm, that's not ready. Just talk about honest farming. I think we as a business felt that we couldn't talk about sustainability without talking. Like a lot of restaurants are, we're buying grass-fed animals, which I thought that was like box tick. We're very aware that we're a big business that has a big impact on the planet, and we're nowhere near living up to the true meaning of that word.
So I guess normal farming has kind of over the years been more industrialised. It's become about high demand and high yield, and in essence, in a way, it's kind of worked, you could say, against nature.
We can't apply the traditional method of manufacture and all the efficiencies that we try and get in a car factory. You can't apply that to farming.
So honest farming really is producing food in the right way. Us as farmers really believe that we need to care for the environment, care for the animals that we produce.
It was all about something called regenerative agriculture, which I'd never even heard of before. And as soon as I heard that and heard the principles of it and heard about you trying to work with nature instead of trying to replace nature and going back to the real kind of craft of what farming used to stand for, I was like, all in. So honest farming is about us trying to tackle that head on.
And again, it's working with nature. It may take a while to get the wheel going, but once it's going, it just keeps spinning. The system that everyone's willing to support is one that enhances the environment and produces some really decent food at the end of it.
Very intense because we will
Fact
go
now,
through the whole
animals leaving the farm and ending up in an honest restaurant, knowing that someone is eating our meat in the garden is just phenomenal.
So honest farming is about us trying to tackle that head on and face into it, try and break down some of the real problems in the wider food supply chain, and ultimately try and live up to that word above
I want to devote a little bit of time to explain to you the way that we see the pathway to synergies and the dissemination and exploitation facility working.
Definitely was a bit of a weird echo then, something else, but hopefully that made a bit of sense to you. Honestfarming.co.uk if you want a bit more of a deep dive into what it actually means. But the three main pillars are here: biodiversity, which is basically just a diverse sector of nature, which is what we need. That's when nature ticks over nicely, is when it's as biodiverse as possible. Soil health, we all need to focus on that, because without soil, we literally will all wither and die in a matter of decades. You look at a lot of the biggest civilizations in the history of humanity. One of the biggest killers of civilization is when their soils are depleted to the point where they cannot grow food, and then all hell breaks loose, as you can imagine. So soil health will start to become a bigger subject, and then carbon sequestration. Now that is the principle that plants, when they grow and when they're healthy and when they're left to grow themselves, they can sequester carbon directly into the soil. That is what photosynthesis does. It puts carbon back into the soil, and we've got a lot of soil, all right? The world has a lot of it. We can sequester carbon and keep it in there and then protect it and then not plow it and not dig it up, not mess around with it. You can actually benefit huge, vast parts of land which are otherwise, just being used for countryside or sometimes for intensive farming, which obviously is bad. So these are the three things that are really important. Now, how have we done this? Well, I had to become an expert in this field. If I was going to enact change, I had to do an absolute deep dive into it. So I watched a lot of documentaries. Some of them scared the shit out of me, to be honest with you, because they were making claims that I was like, God, if this is true, then Honest can't sell meat anymore. This is shocking. But I looked into them more, and I was like, actually, this very much is nowhere near as simple as that. But obviously, our media, our news channels, everything, they love to distill the simplest message and make it as powerful and punchy as possible. So I'd urge you, I don't know what your views are around your diet and around meat eating and veganism, things like that. I'd urge you to look deeper into the subject, because it's a fascinating one, and it's obviously incredibly complicated. But for us, we wanted to work direct with farmers. Now, you've probably all seen an advert on TV with big food businesses going, yeah, we work direct with farmers. Look at this guy in a clad shirt. He's our farmer. They might do, but they don't, they buy eventually from a farmer, because that's where their food comes from. They don't work direct. They're probably about 3 businesses removed from an actual direct relationship with a farmer. And it's hard for some of those businesses, because they might be buying off 20,000 farms. So yeah, to enact change on that is near on impossible. So for us, we wanted to work direct with farmers and work with as few as possible. And then we can enact the most change. So these are our farmers right now. The guys on the left, the guys on the right have set up a collective called Grassroots Farming that they set up off the back of meeting me. And they are the farmers on the ground, because I can talk, a relatively good game on a stage like this, but can I go to a farm and tell a farmer how to farm? Like, absolutely not. So these guys are actual farmers. And then the 2 guys on the left, they've got, that's Ed, he's got a farm in Reading, who supplies our restaurants, and Aled, who's in Wales, he supplies our restaurants as well. So these guys are the real brains behind it, and they're doing they're practicing what I preach, effectively. And they do the simple thing. They work with nature. Like, it seems so logical. Even for people who have no interest in farming, you look at farmers who work with nature compared to farmers who try and replace nature with things like pesticides, which are poisons, and fertilizer, which is artificial growth. Those things do not gel with a natural environment. They replace, or they restrain, or sometimes they kill. So working with nature, for me, just feels like a complete no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't we try and work alongside or with, as opposed to just trying to kind of restrain and poison a lot of the time. And this is one of our farms. This is a farm in Reading, and this is a field that the very next day our cattle were going to go and graze, which you can see the biodiversity there. We were there, and there's a road the other side of that hedge, busy road going along, and the noise of the birds and the insects and the bees and everything that's going on. And you do not get that in intensive farming systems. They're desolate wastelands, even arable systems where you've got wheat and grain and a lot of the vegetarian and vegan systems. They're so dependent on pesticides, which are poisons. That is what they do. If I drank a pesticide, it would kill me. But they kill everything but that thing they're wanting to grow. So there is no biodiversity at all. This was a real eye-opener for me, to see something natural where Ed had just left that field for 2 months to just grow, and when you let the cattle in, they literally run into it, and it's like a buffet for them to have something a bit more interesting. And biodiversity means just more creatures coming in. So there's wildflowers there. That means there's insects. That means there's birds. That means there's foxes, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And it doesn't take long for this to happen. But the big thing, I suppose, and hopefully one of the reasons why you're here, is why are we doing this? It's partly because we're called Honest, And I feel like if we're going to be called honest and we're actually going to try and address our sustainability, we have to do this. And it's partly for me, I started to feel quite guilty about owning a business that buys meat by the ton. And it started to really lay down on me, and I wanted us to be better. And I wanted us to be better because of the challenges we have and the challenges we've got past. And I wanted to be better for our people, which I know may sound a bit cheesy, but we're in a very difficult workplace right now. Hospitality is battered and bruised from the last 3 years. So many of the hard-working people in hospitality have left this country. So to try and attract new people into our industry is not easy. And hospitality is not a respected industry in this country. Like, I wish it were, but in the States, in Europe, it's a career. Over here, it's a when you're going to get a real job, which is a real shame because, you know, I've done pretty well out of hospitality. I've got many friends who've set up businesses and have done incredibly well and employ, you know, 500-600 people. We've got managers in our restaurants who have been with us for 6 months. They go from being a waiter to running a business that turns over £3 million a year, and they manage the whole P&L behind that. Like, I don't know many industries where you can do that. But we need to attract people to our industry, and this is, you know, I'm going to say it again, and I put it in bigger letters and in bold. Pride is so underrated. For me, the moment I don't feel proud of honest, I'm done. I'm out the door. I've said that to our investors. You do anything that makes me feel like I'm not proud of what we do, then I'll leave. And I hope that's the same for the people that work for us. So if honest is going to stay a business that people want to work for, I think this is a no-brainer. I think we have to be doing stuff like this. And it bugs me the amount of businesses who sell a lot of meat who don't talk about anything. And I blame us, and to a degree I blame people in you know, all of us, that we're allowing these businesses to sell us food and we don't know where the hell it comes from. And that's because we don't want to know, and that's because they don't want us to know. Because if you did know, you'd probably ask a few more questions. But pride is the thing that I'm really trying to tap into. And obviously, like I said, we're called honest, and I think that is incredibly important, that you have that word above your door, you show some vulnerability, and you try and live up to it. And I've discussed hospitality. You know, it's in a really dark place right now, and this year is probably going to be the final for a lot of businesses, because we've been licking our wounds for many, many years. And I think that in order for hospitality to keep driving and keep booming, we need to behave differently. We can't just plod along like we have done for the last however many decades it's been going. So I think hospitality needs this, and I think we need to ask more questions of hospitality, and customers need to ask more questions. I would love you know, some of you guys from this event to maybe in your favorite restaurant, just ask them. And most of the time you'll be left with completely blank faces. I send emails out all the time to businesses asking for a bit more about some of the claims they've made here, or just a bit more information there. Most of the time I don't even get a reply. Obviously I don't use my Tom at Honest Burgers email, but I do think it's important. If anyone wants to enact any form of change here, we've got to be more curious, because it's quite an intimate thing, eating, and it's a shame that it's lost some of that intimacy. But putting something in your body that keeps you alive, I think you should be more choosy about what you do with that and where it comes from. And yeah, our food needs this. I've discussed a lot about the impact that our supply chains are having. I think food is going to be a very serious issue over the next however many decades or centuries we're still going. Food is going to be the thing which scares a lot of us, because it's broken right now. A close friend of mine, he puts it as food doesn't pay its bills anymore. It doesn't pay its bills to the farmer. That's why farmers are propped up with subsidies. You know, 40% of the EU budget goes on farming subsidies. Food doesn't pay its bills nutritionally. All our food is basically empty now compared to how it was 100 years ago. And that's because of things like artificial fertilizer, which just puts the things in there to help it grow, and that's it. None of the other stuff, none of the other organic matter that you get. So our food really needs this, I think. And it needs a system that relies more on nature than it does on these massive chemical giants that are making trillions and trillions of pounds, laying poisons and crap all over our countryside. So I think our food needs this. But what's next for Honest is very simple, really. It's how can we make 100% of this supply chain fit into our supply chain. So right now, this is our farm in Reading. This is something called mob grazing, which I'd urge you, give it a Google, it's fascinating. And this is our goal. So right now, 30% of our beef is regenerative. We have managed to keep our prices the same by offering this beef. We don't think that we should pass this on to customers right now. It's obviously a very difficult time for anyone to be spending more money. So we've sucked it up. We've taken this extra cost. And it's something that we feel very passionately about. And luckily, my investors, they feel the same. They think it's a good venture, and it's a way for us as a business to stand out. So our goal is by the end of 2026, we're going to have 100% of our supply chain. That number was sooner, but yeah, we're going through some pains this year as well, like I'm sure any business is. So we've had to extend it a little bit, but I'm hoping by 2026, all of our beef will be from a regenerative farming supply chain, and that will be a day I'm mega proud of. But I'll leave you with a final quote. This is a guy who, weirdly, is actually one of the founders of the Chemical Brothers. It's called Andy Cato, who is now a regenerative farmer. He sold his rights to the Chemical Brothers and bought a farm in France and just was completely hooked by it. And this is not an actual direct quote of him, but I think it's a powerful one because, yeah, if you want to enact change, we've got to stop relying on things that don't work. So we need to stop depending on them. So with that, I will leave you open to some questions, hopefully. Anyone?
Hi, my name's Gillian. I've got a deli and I've also got a bit of a horticultural background. But I was curious, can you just explain to me again, which is the difference between regenerative and organic farming? So,
organic is a really great start. The only issues I've got with organic is it's kind of a box-ticking exercise it's become with organic. So if you want to make a good start, obviously organic is far more readily available. Organic has very high welfare standards. You only can use organic pesticides and organic fertilizers, which is really good in comparison with some of the synthetic chemical ones. So if you can, and I know that's a big if right now because organic food is expensive, but organic is very, very good. The reason that I feel regenerative is better is regenerative is a journey of continuous improvement. So when we have our farms and we have a farming system, a farming plan, and every one of our farming plans is completely tailored to that farm because no farm is the same. When you do organic, you literally just have to, I say, obviously it's a long process and it's lengthy, but you have to make sure you follow this set framework, and then you become organic certified. And it's a lengthy process. You need to show years of non-pesticide usage, stuff like that. But the benefits you get from regenerative farming, you get from organic farming, but almost as a kind of byproduct of what you're doing. Whereas regenerative, you're incentivized to keep going. There shouldn't just be a bit where you finish your form and you're like, cool, I'm done now. I've done my bit. With regenerative, you are constantly striving to keep improving. And if you don't, and this is a big if, regenerative agriculture, you could say it's been around for thousands of years because it's how we fed ourselves long before we understood it. What we're trying to do now is how far can we push it? How effective can it be? It might be that soils fill in 20 years. We don't know. It might be 200 years. But regenerative for me is far more about a lot of the founding principles of organic, but it's not as rigid. And you show this continuous improvement. Cool. Good question.
Hey Tom,
Hi.
really enjoyable talk to listen
Thanks.
to. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I believe that you mentioned when you called yourself honest, you didn't have the intention of doing all the great work that you're doing now.
Yeah.
So what was the inspiration about calling yourself honest in the first place?
I was 24, so I didn't really have much going on in my life at that time. And the inspiration for me was food. It always has been. That's the thing that gets me going. But yeah, it was a good time to start a business. I'd urge anyone to start a business when you're that young because you can make tons of mistakes and just bounce back from them. And I think if I tried to do that now, I'd be like quivering mess on the floor right now, I think. So it's good to just, get on with it. That kind of, like I said, arrogance of youth is really good. But largely it was when we started kind of picking at the thread a little bit, and we tried a burger that we made ourselves, and we were like, this is amazing. It's so much better than anything I've ever had in a pub or in a festival or whatever. And it just started to unravel. We were like, we could do this. But for me, it was always food. Food was my, and still is, my biggest kind of go-to. So I wanted to just be involved in something that had food at the centre of it, because I did a placement year in marketing in London, and I, hated every second of it. So it's kind of, what can I do to make sure I don't do that? Thanks. Is that everything? Hi.
So regenerative farming, obviously you're UK based.
Yeah.
Do you know if that's a global thing? And I mean, we're in the fragrance industry. In our industry, obviously, there's some things you can't grow in the UK. It has to be grown elsewhere. How would you kind of globalize that?
So I think you'll find, certainly if you say kind of less developed countries, it might even be more prominent, because this reliant on chemicals cannot be sustainable for lots of reasons, sometimes financially. One of the interesting things about regenerative agriculture, which James Evans, who's one of the co-founding farmers there, he farms on a lovely, beautiful estate, and he's a tenant farmer. And they were an intensive farm before, and then the whole estate gets sold to this guy who James called a flip-flop wearing Londoner, who obviously had a lot of money. And the guy bought the estate and was like, I want you to be organic, I want you to be regenerative. And James is like, what the hell's that? I don't want to get involved with this. He's now the biggest advocate for the industry. He's on, all sorts of panels. And part of it for him was financially seeing how much it benefits. Like, instead of having to fill your barns with grain and with fertilizers, you're allowing your land, if you manage your land effectively and carefully, you're managing to gain more out of it. But around the international point, it's huge in America. There's some really great farms. I'm trying to think. I think it's called Pasture Oak, but I'll Google it and find there's a really, really great farm that's quite far ahead of the UK in terms of data. Because one of the points that's very difficult, certainly in the UK industry, is nature's time frame is very different to ours. So 100 years can go by, and very little might change in that 100 years. But for us, obviously, we want answers now. If you're a business, you're probably never going to be around in 100 years' time, so you need to be much quicker. So in the States, they've got some really, really good examples. I don't know too much about how it's landing in Europe, but there are some big ones. It's called White Oak Pastures is the one in the States. But obviously, I only know the kind of cattle industry, but I'm sure if you have a Google, there'll be some interesting stuff there, because it is getting a lot of traction now, and some governments are starting to back it, which is, I think, a really great sort of step in the right direction. All good? Right, well, thank you. Appreciate it.